If Kamala Harris wants to beat Donald Trump, she needs to speak to a single Palestinian person publicly. Democrats right now are at least realizing that this is an issue, which is why she spent the last week talking with Arab and Muslim leaders behind closed doors. And probably why a Democratic super PAC reached out to me this week to ask if I would be a strategist on this specific issue. So I will tell you what I told them. This is how Kamala Harris can win swing states. Now, I am Palestinian, but I'm not going to make any moral or humanitarian or political arguments in this video. This is cold, hard electoral strategy. So if you want Kamala Harris to win, no matter your opinion on anything in the Middle East, just listen first and then make your judgment. Polling has shown us time and time again that providing carte blanche for Israel, or any foreign power for that matter, is unpopular. A CBS YouGov poll from this summer showed that 77% of all Democratic voters believe the US should stop sending weapons to Israel. And 81% of Democratic voters want to send humanitarian aid to Gaza. If 3/4 of your party is saying anything, you should listen, especially in swing states where this is even truer. After Harris became the presumptive nominee, YouGov conducted a similar poll in swing states. It found that 57% of undecided Democratic voters in Pennsylvania would be more likely to vote for Harris if she committed to stop sending arms to Israel. In Arizona, that number was 44%, and in Georgia, it was 34%. That might sound like a risk, but the inverse wasn't true. Only 7, 5, and 5% of all voters in those respective states said they would be less likely to vote for Harris if she took that position. A mere fraction of the voters she could win otherwise. But if that doesn't convince you, let's talk about the 2020 election. Because Joe Biden essentially ran unopposed this year, but his primary results aren't promising if they translate to November. For example, 145,000 Michigan Democrats cast their primary vote for a candidate other than Joe Biden. Over 2/3 of those were for the uncommitted movement. Biden only won Michigan by 154,000 votes in 2020. And Michigan, by the way, has an enormous Lebanese population. In the Wisconsin primary, 66,000 people voted for someone other than Joe Biden. 48,000 of those were uncommitted. Biden won Wisconsin in 2020 by a margin of 0.53%. That was only 20,000 votes. Less than half of Wisconsin's uncommitted primary supporters. And then we have Georgia, with the narrowest margin of 2020, 0.02%. 20,000 Democrats voted for not Joe Biden. That's almost twice the number of votes Trump tried to find 4 years ago when he lost the state. And sure, you can say that's Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris. But in all of those states right now, Trump is leading Harris by a wider margin than when he lost them. And he famously polls low. It's also important for Democrats to not only win, but win by as large a margin as possible. Donald Trump is going to contest the results in every state if he loses. So widening that margin makes it more difficult for him to successfully overturn this election. When Kamala Harris became the nominee, there was a huge groundswell of support and excitement because she wasn't Joe Biden. But over the past few weeks, she's turned from popular policies and the base that got her here in the first place to court Republicans and say that she is literally the same as Joe Biden. We have seen this before. Hubert Humphrey didn't break from LBJ on the Vietnam War until it was too late. And today, many consider that the largest reason he lost to Nixon. Look, I am not asking for a gigantic heel turn. I'm not telling Harris to go out in a keffiyeh or say she'll sanction Israel. This is America. I know that. But there is compromise to be made here, at least if you want to win. Harris can partially break from Joe Biden by affirming the humanity of Palestinians, acknowledging any missteps, or even just committing to more aid for Gaza, and agreeing that as president, she will make sure that the Leahy Act, which stops our weapons from being used for human rights offenses, is still in effect. Israel is our ally. This stance should not be controversial. In fact, it would just be following our own laws and embracing ideas that are popular nationwide and in vital swing states. I have tried to go about this through every official channel. When I was the only Palestinian credentialed creator at the DNC, I frequently spoke to the Harris campaign and begged them to put me in touch with her or a campaign surrogate to talk about this issue openly, to show that Harris would be different from both Trump and Biden, which was her appeal in the first place. The campaign was incredibly sympathetic over Zoom, but when it came to setting things up, they ghosted. And just this week, a Democratic super PAC contacted me and asked me to run an Arab, Muslim, anti-war creator campaign to convince uncommitted voters in those exact same swing states. I told them I would, in exchange for just 10 minutes with the vice president on camera. I said I'd help run strategy, come up with compromises, and genuinely try to find common ground on this issue for both sides. They said no, but did mention that I would be at the top of the list if the opportunity ever arose. And it's the same for plenty of others, especially the uncommitted movement, who spent months talking with Democratic officials behind closed doors, usually sympathetically, and yet we're told that a Palestinian American would not be allowed to endorse Kamala Harris on stage at the DNC. That would have partly solved the problem that they're in today. But instead, after the DNC, multiple Democratic strategists insisted that Kamala Harris could win without Muslims or Arabs or anti-war voters, essentially ignoring an entire constituency. Look, I don't think Kamala Harris is some messiah for Middle East peace, but I also don't want Donald Trump to win for a lot of reasons. Harris's appeal for me is at least under her administration, we wouldn't be fighting a two-front war for peace over there and our basest civil rights over here. And there are a lot of undecided, most likely Democratic voters who feel the same way. If Harris wants to win this election, to reduce the risk of loss as much as possible, she has to soften on this issue publicly. And that shouldn't be new for her. She was the first person in Biden's administration to use the word ceasefire and frequently talk about aid in concrete ways that other Biden officials wouldn't. This rightward heel turn, doubling down on war hawk bullshit, is not only sudden, but it's also outdated. And Harris needs to leave it in 2016 where it belongs. The best way to do that is to speak with a Palestinian person about this issue. You can strategize beforehand, compromise a bit together, but you have to do it. If only to show those voters that you're not trying to flip them off. And look, I'm free, and I look white, so unfortunately I'm more palatable to certain audiences. But we have a Palestinian woman in Congress, and many vetted Democratic Palestinian officials who would jump at the chance to help Harris on this issue, one that Joe Biden was far too stubborn to even budge on. The Democratic Party is supposed to be a big tent. That means that Kamala Harris should be fully capable of speaking to Liz Cheney one day and a Palestinian American constituent the next. These are not mutually exclusive and would make an enormous difference in how the Arab, Muslim, and anti-war communities view her. But most importantly, it could make a massive difference for the fate of our nation. Because sure, you can say it's their funeral, but if Trump and Project 2025 are at the helm of this country, it could be our funeral too. So if Kamala Harris or Democratic strategists or anyone on her campaign is listening, you just need 15 minutes to change the course of your campaign and maybe the future of our country. Not because that would wave a magic wand and fix everything, but because it showed that you see those voters, think they belong in this party, and are willing to work together to build something better.